to stories, understand our community, understand, where are those threads in the tapestry where we are all interconnected, and why is it that so many people in our city are hungry? Why is that? Why is it that so many are having a hard time finding a safe place to live or to stay? So those are the kinds of questions. Many of you have been a part of our series where we've been bringing in monthly panelists as guests to lead us in discussions, and those have been really, really rich. And for those of you who have been with us before, welcome back. For those of you first-timers, we're glad to meet you. Very glad you're here with us this evening. Now, tonight's program is going to be just so exciting and a little bit different. It's going to be much more interactive throughout the course of the evening. We are going to be walking through, and learning about an exhibit that was first brought to our community by the Winston-Salem Foundation a couple of years ago. And it is called Undesign the Redline. Just by a show of hands, raise your hand if you previously saw the exhibit when it was here at the library. Okay, so that's about not quite half of the audience. So many of you have already had exposure. We will be bringing forward a couple of our guest facilitators and interpreters here from our community in just a moment. But I did want to show just share just a few quick housekeeping announcements. First of all, to just be aware that this program is being recorded. And so if you speak up later with questions or comments, just be aware that those will likely be in a YouTube video posted on the Centenary website at some point in time. So that's important that we're all aware of that. And then also, I hope you all found your way to the refreshments at the entrance to the auditorium. The ladies' room is directly behind the refreshments table. And then if there's need for men's room, up here, the stage steps to my right, your left, just through up that half flight of stairs, and you'll find what you need. So those are the housekeeping announcements. Am I overlooking anything critical before we get underway? I don't think so, but again, I'm just so, oh yes, one other thing I was going to mention, and that is the handout. Hopefully you all have a 3-page stapled handout, and we will be learning more about the federal policies this evening that have led to redlining. There's a map on the back that we'll be seeing in real life, larger form, and then at the very end of your little short stapled handout is a little feedback sheet that we'll ask you at the end of the evening to just tear off your back page and just leave it on your chair here in the auditorium, or hand it to any one of the volunteers with a name tag. So we'll be adding you to our mailing list if you'd like more information. Okay, well then let's go ahead and get into the reason we are all here, and that is to welcome our guest facilitators and interpreters. And I will share with you a little bit of their background, and you'll see why they're such rich resources that we are going to really look forward to hearing from. Phyllis Caldwell-George is going to be our first facilitator that you'll hear from. And Phyllis is the president and CEO of Financial Pathways of the Piedmont. She joined the agency in 1998, and prior to becoming president and CEO, she oversaw their financial management and debt counseling and housing programs, and also the Center for Home Ownership, which is a one-stop housing counseling center and has assisted hundreds of families in obtaining ownership through a nationally recognized pre-home ownership education course. So you can see that she's truly an expert and passionate advocate as well of the importance of asset building for low to moderate income households. She's partnered with funding partners, lots of other nonprofits. She serves as a trainer, speaker, and educator for a lot of educational events. She serves regularly on regional boards and committees. The Kate B. Reynolds Foundation Local Impact Council, the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, and the Affordable Housing Group of North Carolina, just a few in a long list of folks that she lends her expertise to. Phyllis has earned a BA not-for-profit management from Salem College, so she's a Salem alum, and also an excellence in nonprofit leadership and management at the Southeast Center for Organizational Leadership in High Point. So we have with us also Marty Pittman. Marty was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in suburban Maryland. He moved to Winston-Salem, graduated from North Forsyth High School, and after attending Appalachian State, Marty worked for the Xerox Corporation, doing some sales and account management work, worked as a paralegal for Womble Carlisle, and even a little bit of a forensics technician work at the Winston-Salem Police Department. And then Marty says that's when he found his true love, a career in philanthropy. So he now serves as a donor services officer at the Winston-Salem Foundation and believes his past jobs have all contributed really to his present position of being able to help people strengthen our community and to further the mission of nonprofit organizations. Marty's married and has one son. In his spare time, he loves woodworking, as does our senior minister, Glenn Kinkin, landscaping, reading, binge-watching TV, and cooking. So, lots of good conversation starters there. Finally, we have Linda Scales-Dark with us. Linda is a registered nurse, retired, graduate of UNC Greensboro and Salve Regina University for nursing in Newport, Rhode Island. She's a Winston-Salem native. She is a proud alumna of the original Atkins High School. So lots of history there. And also a family historian. Upon returning to Winston after retirement, she has joined the boards of 2 nonprofit preservation groups, one of those, the Winston-Salem African American Archive, instrumental to the content that we're going to be seeing and experiencing this evening, and then also Friends of the Oddfellows Cemetery Restoration. So Linda has worked with the foundation a few years ago as a tour guide for the very exhibit that she'll be touring us through this evening. And she recently authored a book about her grandfather during the time of Jim Crow segregation here in Winston. And the title of the book is William Samuel Scales, African American Businessman in a Segregated Town. So she's married with 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and believes in positive connections and collaboration within our community, and encourages all of us to be responsible citizens, whether socially, financially, or participating in the voting process. So good reminder of all the ways that we can be responsible citizens in our community. I also want to make sure that I introduce to all of you who may not already know them, our senior and associate minister in the back who are assisting and supporting us this evening, Reverend Glenn Kinkin, our senior minister here at Centenary United Methodist Church, and a Winston-Salem native himself. And we also have Reverend Meg Peters, who is our associate pastor for engagement. So she is supporting us as well. Okay, enough of the introductions and the odds and ends of getting organized. I'm going to hand the microphone now to Phyllis and let her share some introductory remarks. So we'll be hearing from Phyllis, we're going to be hearing from Marty, and then we're going to be dividing into groups and actually walking up the hallway to our gallery room here on the first floor. So that's the way the evening is going to lay out. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I have a few questions for you. What waits for no one? What flies? What has gotten away from us? And what do you not have an endless amount of? And so if you look at your sheets you have, it talks about when some of these things came into place. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was created by Congress in 1933. And then you have the National Housing Act of 1934, which was part of the Federal New Deal legislation. And that was created in 1934. And I'm sorry that the Homeowners Loan Corporation was created in 1933. And then you also have the Fair Housing Act that was created in 1968. I'm going to be very honest with you all. I was born in 1966. So that was just a few years after I was born that we actually had laws that came into place about fair housing, which actually said that it prohibited discrimination based on the sale, rental, or financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, and sex. And then 1988, they included familial status and then disability. And so if you think about that, that was only a little over 50 years ago. So not a lot of time. And what the Redline exhibit is going to show you is that not much has changed over time. And so we as a collective, because I do feel that we don't get anything done alone, it takes change makers, and we have to do a lot to disrupt systems that have been in place for a long time. And so what do we need to do? If you have not experienced the Redline exhibit, it will, in some cases, cause you to be able to take a pause, because it can be in a lot of ways, disheartening. And it's okay that we sit in those feelings, and it's okay that we not own them. But it's not okay for us not to do anything about it, because we have the opportunity to do so. So as you go through the exhibit, take those things in, write your questions down mentally. You'll have some sticky notes and some pens, and you'll be able to write some questions down. And as you go away today, you'll probably have even more questions, and that's okay as well. And you can call on Marty, myself, or Linda with those questions. We may not be able to answer them, but we can certainly have a discussion about those questions as well. And so today is going to be a lot to take in. And in a short period of time, here we go again with time. And so our theme today is going to be about time. And so I'm going to turn the mic over to Marty, because he has a lot to take us through, and then we'll be able to enjoy the exhibit. Marty.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? First of all, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't believe Martha and Suzanne knew what they were getting into when they asked me to speak. So I had a script, but then I thought, if you know my background, I don't go by a script, so I just sort of talk off the cuff. And you can judge by my background that it's somewhat varied and it's all over the map. But people always tell you, Marty will always throw out a pop culture reference at any moment, so don't be surprised if I throw out a pop culture reference. So how many of us are familiar with the movie Back to the Future? Okay. One of the characters, Marty McFly, great name, by the way, Marty. He and Doc went back in time in a DeLorean. So bear with me. Why don't we pretend that we're going to go back in time, but instead, since we all can't fit in the DeLorean, why don't we pretend that this is a train and we can go back in time? And I will be your conductor, and you'll be the passenger. So come along with me on this magical mystery tour. We get on a train. I'm the conductor. I take your tickets. And our first stop is 1863. We get off the train, we look around, and we see that there's a civil war that's taking place. And we're somewhat dismayed at what we see, because it's a civil war. And by the time the war ends, we'll see that 600,000 Americans have lost their lives during this war. We also see that there's an Emancipation Proclamation that's been enacted by President Lincoln, which means that if you're a slave in the southern states, you're hereby free. But that means that the North has to win the war for the law to take effect. So we get back on the train, and I'm going to dial in 1865. We get off the train, and we see that The 13th, the 14th, and the 15th amendments have been enacted. And these are called the Reconstruction Amendments. And what these amendments do is they basically give rights and privileges to African Americans, to newly freed African Americans. But if you think everyone is happy about this, I got some beachfront property in Kansas I want to sell you. So we get back on our train, and I'm going to dial in 1867. And when we get off this train, we see that African Americans are sort of flexing their economic muscles, and they're flexing their political muscles. And African Americans are holding political office. And again, not everyone is happy with this. We also see that there's something called the black codes that are in place. I'm glad you asked me what the black codes are. They sort of govern how African Americans live and move, especially throughout the South. And we also see what's called the convict leasing system in place. And what that means is, let's just pretend that I'm an African-American man, I'm in Lake Charles, Louisiana around this time, and I'm just leaning up against a building smoking my corncob pipe. I'm not bothering anyone, no one's bothering me. But I can be arrested for vagrancy, for doing nothing. So historians tell us that at the time, the criminal justice system and private entities such as plantations and corporations relied on this cheap labor system. And who was the cheap labor? People that look like me. So what we found was there was a loophole in the 13th Amendment. Remember, the 13th, 14th, and 15th gave rights to newly freed slaves, but there was a loophole in the 13th Amendment that said, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. That's a nice little loophole there, isn't it? Which means that if you were arrested, you could be pressed into slavery, you could be pressed into involuntary servitude. And if you were a plantation owner or you worked at a corporation, that was cheap labor you didn't have to pay for. Also remember that the federal troops were also in the South at this time, but there were still lynchings that were taking place. There were beatings, intimidation, all kinds of things going on. And during this time, close to 2,000 African Americans were lynched, not only in the South, but in Kansas as well. So with that bit of information, we hop back on our train, and I'm going to dial in, there we go. I'm going to dial in 1877. And when we land in 1877, we find, we're in March of 1877, by the way, we find that in November of 1876, there was a presidential election between two candidates, Rutherford B. Hayes, Republican, and Samuel Tilden, Democrat. Now, by all counts and measures, Samuel Tilden won this election. But it's highly contested, hotly contested, with accusations of malfeasance and intimidation and fake electors. Have we heard that term before? Now, it's not written down, but historians will say that there was a compromise that was reached. And let me dig into that a little bit more. At the time, Tilden had 184 electoral votes. You need 185 to be president. Hayes had 165. There were 4 states that were being contested: Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Oregon. 20 electoral votes at stake. If Tilden gets one of those states, he's over the threshold of 185, he's president. Hayes, on the other hand, needs all 4 states. He needs all 20 of those electoral votes to get the 185 threshold. Now again, historians say that since this wasn't written down, that a compromise was struck between the moderate Democrats and the Republicans. And that compromise said the Democrats won't filibuster, they won't block, they won't challenge, they won't obstruct. They will allow Rutherford B. Hayes to be named president if you do a couple of things. Remove the federal troops from the South, and let the South deal with the black problem without Northern interference. So I guess the Republicans are saying, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You're telling me that you won't filibuster, you won't block, you won't obstruct, you won't challenge Rutherford B. Hayes being named president if we removed federal troops from the South and we let those southern states deal with the black problem without northern interference. Is that what you're telling me? Is that what I'm hearing? Partner, you got yourself a deal. And with that, Rutherford B. Hayes is named President of the United States. The federal troops that were in the South are hereby removed. If you think lynchings took place then, without the federal troops, we see the number of lynchings explode exponentially. The Tuskegee Institute chronicled, recorded, wrote down, whatever words you want to use, recorded the number of lynchings from 1882 to 1968. I was born in 1963, by the way. During that time frame, from 1882 to 1968, they recorded 4,743 lynchings during that time span. Of that number, almost 3,500 blacks were lynched. The rest were white. So whites were being lynched as well. Well, why were the lynchings taking place? A variety of reasons. Being accused of a crime. Plain old racial hatred. Violating societal norms. You really didn't need a reason for a lynching. I've looked at some of the pictures and not a whole lot turns my stomach, but a lot of these lynchings were, what's the word, cause célèbre? I mean, everyone could just gather. Come one, come all. Lynching taking place at 2 p.m. Family fun, picnic. Sort of twisted in a way, but this is what was going on at that time. Also, we see the Jim Crow laws take effect, which is, to me, which is government-aided, government-condoned, government-abetted racial discrimination, the separate but equal doctrine. Yeah, things were separate, but they certainly weren't equal. We know that. I mean, education-wise, they were separate, but they weren't equal. Housing, they were separate, but they weren't equal. We know that. But that separate but equal doctrine was in place. So with that bit of information, we hop back on our train, and I'm going to dial in, and you can get one of these watches off Amazon too. I'm going to dial in October 1929. Boof. We get off the train and we look around and we're like, my goodness gracious, what is happening here? I mean, it is chaos, it is calamity, everything is happening. We hear of people jumping off skyscrapers because they realize that they're suddenly penniless. They've gone from riches to rags overnight. We see the stock market is in free fall. We see 1 in 5 working Americans is unemployed. We see food rotting on the shelves because no one has any money to buy any food. We see soup lines everywhere. We see families being evicted from their homes because they don't have money to pay their mortgages. This is a Great Depression. Now, who's in office at this time? President Herbert Hoover. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've never really heard of Herbert Hoover. Now, here's your pop culture reference. The only time I've heard of Herbert Hoover was in the theme song to All in the Family. Who remembers All in the Family? Boy, the way Glenn Miller played. What's the next line? There you go. And there's one line that says, Mr. We could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. I didn't know who Herbert Hoover was. I mean, he wasn't Jefferson or Washington or Lincoln anymore. I didn't know he was president. But in either event, he was president at this time. So in 1932, there's a presidential election taking place between 2 candidates. In this corner, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the incumbent president from the great state of California. Let's give a warm welcome to Herbert Hoover. My goodness. His challenger, the governor of the great state of New York. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So in November of 1932, the election takes place. Will America stay the course with Hoover, or will he opt for someone new? Folks, it ain't even close. It is nowhere near close. In fact, if you look up landslide in the dictionary, you'll see the 1932 election. Roosevelt takes 472 of the 531 electoral votes. He gets roughly 58% of the vote as compared to almost 39% for Hoover. 2% went to an independent cabinet. Roosevelt takes 42 of the 48 states. He even takes California, Hoover's home state. In fact, if you look at the electoral map of California, you'll see that Hoover won the county in which he was born, but the rest of California went to Roosevelt. 22 million votes for Roosevelt, a tad over 15 million for Hoover. America has spoken. Out with Hoover, in with Roosevelt. The people like Roosevelt. He's sort of he's got a calm demeanor about him, a calming presence. In fact, at his inaugural address in 1933, let me see if I can get my Roosevelt voice here. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror. You get the point. You get the point. Roosevelt even has this thing called fireside chats where he sits in front of the fireplace and he talks to the nation, and families gather around the radio to listen to what the president says. Now, they gather around the radio because there were no flat screen TVs or Netflix or Hulu or anything like that at the time. You get my point. But also, Roosevelt institutes what's called the New Deal, where he brings in things like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the National Labor Relations Act, the Social Security Act, Unemployment Insurance, FDIC, and the Security and Exchange Commission to sort of keep an eye on Wall Street so that investors can feel happy about their investments. Even though Roosevelt was a Democrat, the Southern Democrats in his party were going to make sure that these New Deal policies that Roosevelt's coming up with is not going to benefit African Americans. So in 1933, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was created to refinance these mortgages and prevent foreclosures and get people back into homes. And so for this, Roosevelt taps a guy named Homer Hoyt out of Chicago. Now, Homer's a real estate guy. He's a real estate analytics guy. He's an urban planning guy. And he went to UNC Chapel Hill. I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. I just thought I would throw it out there. So they need a way to determine which areas of town are risky for loans and which areas of town are prime for loans. Sounds pretty good to me. I mean, you need some sort of standard or measure. So Homer comes up with what's called these residential security maps, 239 maps that correspond to 239 cities across the country. Sounds like a good idea. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Homer. Homer came up with this report that showed which racial groups had the most positive impact on property values and which racial groups had the least positive impact on property values. There were 14 racial groups involved. Do you want to know what those 14 racial groups are in order from most positive impact to least positive? You want to know those 14 in order? Okay, you're going to make me say it. The English, the Scots, the Irish, the Scandinavians, the Northern Italians, the Czechs, the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Greeks, the Russians, the Jews, the Southern Italians, the Negroes, and the Mexicans, all in order, from most positive impact on property values to least positive impact. I tell you that to say, I don't think Homer's using any analytics or math or calculus or abacus or slide rule or anything. I think it's just plain old racism. Now, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at the map that's included in your package, but that map is 1937 Winston-Salem. And you see it's color-coded. Green, which means that it's desirable for insurers. Blue, well, green means the best. It's type A, it's the best. Blue means it's desirable. Not quite a green, but still very good. C is yellow, type C, which means that area is in decline. And finally, the red areas, hence the term redlining. Those red areas are what they call hazardous to insurers, which means that they're most likely to default on their loans. Now, if we look at the green area, in 1937, that was Buena Vista, Robin Hood Road, Virginia Avenue, so forth. If you look slightly below that in the blue area, that's the Ardmore area, Hawthorne Road, Academy, Queen Street, so forth. Now, if you look at the 12 o'clock area of the map up at the top, the yellow, that means that area is in decline per this map. That's the North Liberty Street, Ogburn Avenue area. And slightly below that area is the home of Smith Reynolds Airport. Now, if you look at the red areas, or in this case, maybe the 3 o'clock area of this map, that's East Winston, East 8th Street, East 9th Street, East 10th Street. I know you're asking, well, what makes an area green? What makes an area blue? What makes an area yellow? What makes an area red? And I got your answer. For the green area, the FHA says in their area description that it's inhabited by business executives and professional men. There's also a section on here that says Negro, none, which means that African Americans don't live in that area, in that green area. For clarifying remarks at the bottom, it says, in this area are located the residences of most of the wealthiest citizens of the city. What about B, the blue area? This FHA document says it's inhabited by professional and medium salaried class. For Negro, it says none. Again, African Americans don't live in this blue area. For clarifying remarks at the bottom, area zoned to restrict infiltration of colored population. Let me read that again. Area zoned to restrict infiltration of colored population. What a word, infiltration. Not inhabited, infiltration. What about C, the area that's in decline, the yellow areas? This FHA document says it's inhabited by mechanics, white, and skilled colored laborers. For Negro, it says yes, 50%, which means that these areas are mixed race. For clarifying remarks at the bottom, poor white and colored properties. And finally, let's take a look at the red area. Inhabited by Negro laborers, factory workers, and mechanics. For Negro, yes, 100%. I would dare say that these maps had a detrimental, let's just say negative effect on Forsyth County today, almost 90 years later. When you go back with Linda, you're going to see some additional maps that outline the city, what it looks like today, and you're going to see disparities in housing, median income, health, food, home ownership. Guess which areas of the city, almost 90 years later, are prospering? Which areas of the city are in deficit mode? Now remember, this is only one of 238 maps that correspond to cities across the country. Duluth, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Sheboygan, York, Pennsylvania, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Chicago, San Diego, Los Angeles, Birmingham, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Daytona Beach. I would dare say that that Forsyth County map has been replicated across the country. I would dare say that Mr. Hoyt's legacy is not a good one. Now, as you've heard that I work at the foundation, and I am so happy to work at the foundation. I get to work with people like Wilbur and Martha, who are just super fun holders, who are looking to change the city, to make things better. And that's what I like to do. That's the type of legacy I like to leave. To me, philanthropy is planting an oak tree, but I know I probably won't be around to enjoy the shade from that oak tree, but knowing that one day in the future, somebody else can sit down under that oak tree and read a book after I'm long gone, to me, that's what it's all about. I don't want to have a Homer Hoyt legacy, but I'm afraid that's what Homer has done. Well, I can tell my part of the journey has come to an end. I see the train is pulled into the station. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be your conductor. And I ask that when you exit the train, please watch your step. Now, who do I pass this to? Do I pass it to Linda or? Oh, I guess you going on your tour? Okay. I'm going to turn this on.
Thanks, Marty. So I think our plan is for us to be able to step into 3 groups led by myself, Marty, and Linda. And we can do this easy. We can do hard things. Here's Susan. Yay!
Okay, thank you very much. And we were just making some adjustments to the physical space where the gallery is set up. We are still in that far corner. We're going to divide you into 3 groups. Did you already accomplish this in some masterminding way while I was out? Or, yeah, exactly. Or we can just take a couple of rows at a time. I'm going to count 10 people. So when we get down to the art gallery space, each of you will have our 3 guest interpreters staying stationary, okay? So they'll stay in the space, and the group will rotate after you've had some conversation. We will also be giving you little sticky notes and a pen if you still need a pen. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, or reflections, these panels of the exhibit are meant to be interactive in that. If you have reactions, feel free to just scribble it down on a sticky note, put it on the panel, okay? So that's the way this can work. So, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, it looks like, how about if everybody on this side is about a group of 11, so you will be in Marty's group, okay? And you'll come back here when we are finished, yes, exactly. So how about if on this side we just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How about if you folks go with Phyllis, okay? And then you folks from here back can be with Linda. Is that the 3rd person I hadn't assigned? And how about if, can you 2 also be in Linda's group, okay? That way we'll be a little better balanced. So if you will just bring your materials with you. And Nicole, can you grab the sticky notes and the pens that are out there, and we'll all walk down to the art gallery and we'll kind of get you guys settled, and you'll see how it will flow. And then at the end of the time in the gallery space, we'll come back here, okay? Thank you. Okay, thank you all again for joining us this evening, and I promised we would keep this brief because we want to wrap up right at 6:30. I hope you all enjoyed, let me put that a different way. I hope that the time you spent with those panels was impactful, and that every time I look at them, I'm learning something new. You might have had that impression, reaction as well. Looked like there was good conversation. I imagine if anyone had any lingering questions or thoughts or anything, you could share those with the facilitators afterwards if they have a moment or two to remain with us. Also, on the last page of your little tiny stapled handout sheet, there's the last page. If you can tear that off and just share with us, if you would like to, your name and your contact information, as well as any comments about this evening's program and the content. So I would invite you all to come back and bring family and friends. Our exhibit, again, thanks to the generosity of the Winston-Salem Foundation, will remain here at Centenary in that art gallery space. We'll pull it all back into the gallery room. It will be here until the last Thursday in June. So if you want to come see it and bring someone with you, you could come Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And generally, we're open for business on Sunday mornings. So you could pop by on a Sunday morning, 9 or noon, and please worship with us as well, if you'd like to. We have a 9 o'clock contemporary worship here in this space, and then we have 11 o'clock traditional, just a few feet above us. So with that, I am going to ask one of our friends, Chuck Bird, if he would pray us out this evening. And I will thank you again, and thank you, Mr. Bird, for joining us this evening. You've been with us a few evenings, so here you are, sir.
Thank you. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Some days, Father, are easier to rejoice in than others. But the very fact that we've assembled here today, a day you ordained, means that you have a purpose for our being together. Father, help us to understand that the colors on a map and the information that we've seen today actually reflects the lives, disparities, shattered hopes and dreams of people who dwell with us. So we just thank you that the church knows the answer, Jesus. We thank you that you have endowed us with a creativity and a curiosity, a love and a care for others, that we might be able to do a new thing. So as we go forward, Father, I just ask that you let your Spirit stir us up in a way that we understand the Winston, but that we also embrace the shalom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Go in peace, go in grace. On behalf of our ministers and our team, we thank you all. Have a good evening. And let's give a round of applause to our facilitators and interpreters.